Well, it's a cold and rainy evening in Charlotte, North Carolina. I came into work after some meetings and it was deserted, locked up, lights out. So here I am sitting in the dark, but I've got to leave soon too. So I wanted to now touch base with everyone because by now a couple of things happened. One, first of all, we had a chance to kind of interact and banter back and forth about things like pet peeves and this and that. And some of you have kind of jumped on, oh, well, he did it, we should do it, have taken a hint from my hinting. And others are kind of waiting by the sidelines. And this kind of is the crux of the issue with social media or anything involving groups of people. We're all very different, have different intellects, different aptitudes, different desires, different motivations. And so if you take any 100 people, there's a good chance that there might be one or two who do dramatic, interesting things, and one or two who do crazy, psychotic things, and there's a whole bunch of people in the middle. And there's even some data to refer to some of this. So what does that mean for us? Well, there are 300 million people in America. If you go to a YouTube video and it has 100 million views, you think, wow, that's a lot. That's a reasonable amount of views. If one of our videos got a million, we'd be pretty happy. But what's a million out of 300 million just in the United States? Well, that's really less than 1%. That's a third of 1%. So when we look at the global scale of what we're working with, even numbers that would seem really large really aren't that large. So for purpose of this course, there's this kind of weird dichotomy between what I think you should know, what you might yourself think you should know, what an employer thinks you should know, what your motivation for taking the class, maybe even what like Herb Brown of my boss thinks you should know. And the interesting thing about this course is when I've gotten student feedback in the past, it's ranged from one extreme is I'm older than the traditional student. I've taken classes all over the country, and this is the best class I've ever taken, when I got that review. And another one that was like, Appstate needs to seriously consider who they hire for these courses and reevaluate their procedure, which was basically like, this guy should be fired. So those are the two extremes. Same teacher. I don't think those two were in the same section, so maybe I really blew one and did another. I can say with some certainty that most students are really uncomfortable with this sort of loose way of starting out. And I do that on purpose because I want you to understand that this is the world. This is your world. This is the way things are going. When you're not in the context of a school, it's exactly what you make of it. If you want to start a club or a group or a social network, you're only going to get as much traction out of it as the people who you bring into that network put into it. So a simple example is, let's say one of you has a passion for, I don't know, breeding dogs or horse racing or a particular local football team. And you go and you send a note to everybody and say, hey, we've got a blog and we've got a discussion group, sign up. You will be hard pressed to get enough involvement to actually have a dialogue that keeps things going. The whole web is littered with blogs that started out and never went anywhere. I've got a few. All kinds of news groups that everybody had a meeting, got excited, signed up for, and then nobody posted after that. And so getting that critical mass is important. And just to kind of reaffirm for you what critical mass is, we'll take a simple example of lighting a campfire. And if you know how to camp, you know what that means. If you don't, just bear with me. If you light a piece of paper, it burns fast and hot and then it's gone. If you put a piece of paper under a log, it burns fast and hot and it's gone. It's not enough flame to light the log. So you actually have to build up from a little piece of paper that lights maybe a piece of cardboard that lights a little twig or pine needles or leaves, and then those get hot enough and burn enough to burn bigger sticks and bigger sticks until eventually you have a big blazing fire. And ask anyone who's tried to start fires, there's kind of an art and a science of putting that together. So I'm going to argue that the same thing happens in these environments. What's going to happen in the next few days is I'm going to kind of turn on the whole course. These are all things that I've used for many semesters, and there are all these activities and things you need to do, and this is me saying you did it and you didn't do it and you need to fix it and so on. And I don't really like to do that, but I have learned that in the context of this course, it's really the only way to make sure everybody covers everything and that you get a sense of, you know, direction and where things are going. So now you've had the first few weeks, almost a month of sort of lack of direction. And now it's time to say, okay, well, you had your chance to kind of figure out what you want to do or not sure what you want to do, and now it's dot, 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 dot. And I am still intending to be very flexible. If there's something you want to spend some time on or you think that the group should do or something you discover, please chime in. I'd really like to see some active conversation. I haven't seen nearly as much of that as I'd like to see, but we all have lives, we're busy. Speaking for myself, I've got 5 kids, they're all involved in activities. wife job, multiple jobs, and so on. So I completely understand how that is. And I know from my own experience, being in online courses, there is a better motivation if you've got teamwork or you've got lists of things you need to do, because you need to go knock those off and move on. So we're going to move in that direction, but I don't want it to stifle your creativity or your willingness to suggest new ideas. And from this point on, you're all going to be blogging and making video logs or vlogs or vlogs, whatever you want to call them, on a weekly basis. So hopefully you're used to a camera. Get one if you don't have one. I'm using a Sony webcam. I don't think I have a mirror I can hold up here, but it's a LifeCam Studio. It's pretty sweet. A lot of you have Logitechs, but you can see the quality here is pretty high. And I like to brag on this camera, just while I'm on the topic. Notice like how small this font is. Now if I zoom in, the problem is I'm shaking, but you see how clearly that gets, and that's still with me shaking. And I've gone so far as to put a Band-Aid in front of there, and it actually picks up the tiny, tiny font on the Band-Aid. So from an instructional perspective, very, very cool. So where am I going with that? Well, I wanted to just kind of give you the change of direction. And I want to actually finish the story. So I told you the beginning of the story was we all showed up to this graduate class, and you can read this in the beginning of the course. When it first turned on, it was sort of the only thing that was there. And we all walked in, and we didn't know what to do, and we said, "Professor, is this the class?" He said, "Yes." Well, what do you want us to do? And he said, "What do you want to do?" Now this was about 97, I believe. And so it turned out to be, it was an organizational behavior class, and he said, you know, we could do whatever we wanted. And occasionally he'd come in and say, well, by the way, I've got all these books that the publishers send me. If any of you want them, you can have them. He'd bring in little short stories and anecdotes, but mostly the class was left up to us. And pretty early on, we had to figure out, well, how are we going to be graded? Because he's going to turn in grades, and what's he going to do? And so we all voted on how we should get grades. And we thought, well, what's the harm in giving everybody A's? And one of the students said, well, I'm in law school, I'm really busy. If you give A's for no matter what we do, I'm just not going to come anymore. And we figured that wasn't really a good enough reason not to give A's. So we voted that everyone would get A's, and sure enough, that student disappeared, and he came back the very last day of class, and I'm assuming he got an A. So it wasn't a rigorous class, but what it really did is highlight in my head like the importance of that involvement, and to some degree how some people are really motivated and want to organize and want to structure, and other people are like, whatever, see ya, or I'm just going to go along for the ride. And to this day, I remember that class with a lot of details. I helped run a session that was built around the 12 Angry Men, which I remember from a communications class when I was an undergrad from an excellent professor. Ironically, I don't remember her name, but I do remember this graduate professor's name. And I remember the class probably more than most classes I've ever taken, even though it wasn't terribly rigorous. One of the critiques for this class was that it lacked rigor, so there's a lot more rigor now. But I wanted to kind of round it off and show how that loose approach can tell you a lot about yourself, and it can tell you a lot about the people around you. And we're not going that loose through the whole thing, because I think I probably would not get rehired to do this if I did that too aggressively, if you can be loose aggressively, right? I even had one student complain anonymously that this was a SACS violation not to have a formal syllabus out there. And interestingly enough, I eventually learned who that was, and she hired me to come do some workshops. So that's kind of an interesting story. But you get all kinds, and hopefully, like any college experience, you're going to have some teachers that are one way and some that are other. So my goal at the end of all this is that you walk out with a level of competence about social media, understanding Web 1.0, Web 2.0, Web 3.0, understanding how sophisticated these networks are and how amazing they are. And I really would like, my daughter, who's at Duke, just now tweeted that there's some scandal there, and my wife told me about something about a fraternity and so on and so forth. And I'd like you to try and bring in those daily media events that involve social media. Like there was a bunch of stories on the web about the Oreo tweet during the blackout of the Super Bowl, right? So those are things that I'd like you to throw out on the discussion forum so we can have kind of a lively, humorous, entertaining discussion as we move forward through the class. So check back on your course next couple of days. Feel free to respond in video so that we can see what you think, or respond in text, however you see fit. And now you can get your big long checklist of some of the things you need to do, but by no means limit yourself to that. And if you see something on there that you think is silly, you say, you know, I'd rather do something else, go for it. We'll do something else, but let's talk about it together. I'm looking forward to the rest of the semester, and thank you for your patience, for sticking with us, or with me till now. I know that it's really weird to be saying, well, where's the teacher, what's going on here? And so hopefully now you have kind of a better understanding of what happened there. And by the way, if any of you are wondering about how to do, you know, video recordings, in this case I'm actually using a tool called Screencast-O-Matic, which I really like. And what's nice is that I can pause it and then go to capturing my desktop. So now you see my desktop, but I'm still here in this small window, which is, let's see if I can just, how do I get my hands adjusted? That's the right hand. So here I'm in this window, right? And that shows up on the screen, and then I can go back to full screen. And I've got the Pro version, which is like $10 a year. So it's really great if you're an educator, because I do a lot of code and show people how things work, and you can resize the window. So I encourage you all to look at that. You've got great tips and tricks to share. Please do share them with the group. If it's something that's not really for evaluation, please consider using the Google group, because that's easier for us all to see and respond to. If it's something where we want more of a formal record, maybe the Moodle discussion group. So keep it coming. We'll talk to you soon.